So, hello everyone. Welcome to Proofpoint and our speech today on why Ethereum ecosystem builders still believe in the ecosystem. I'm Edward Trosclair, your moderator, and also the developer relations at Lisk, which is a L2 that's focused on high growth markets. And I'm thrilled to be with at least one of our incredible leaders in the space and person who's shaping the blockchain landscape, Rene Reinsberg. Rene, maybe you can introduce yourself a little bit and tell us a little bit about Celo, and if you're really brave, you can maybe tell us one thing that most people don't know about you.
Oh, wow. You on the panel? I don't know, are you?
I think so, yeah.
Excellent, wow. It's going to be a party. All right, my name is Rene. Been in the space for 7-ish years. Co-founded Celo. Been working a lot of different things related to Celo. Most recently, actually as of this week, we launched also some of the core team together with a team we acquired, Open Passport. We launched a product called Self, which is ZK Identity. So at least a little ZK sparkle for this conference. But one thing most people don't know, I mean, like probably most people here don't know anything about me. I grew up in East Germany. And I know there was a recent debate about communism on crypto Twitter, so it's a fun one, special connection there.
What kind of a connection?
Communist at heart. All right. This is gonna be a fun panel. Is this recorded? Is it streamed? Can I say stuff that? Oh, shit. Okay. It's recorded. No one watches recordings. That's okay. All right. Cool.
Awesome. And also, too, we have Avi Zurlo, the CEO of the NIL Foundation. Maybe you can give us a little bit more information about NIL. And also, too, if you're really brave, you can tell us one thing that most people don't know about you.
Okay. I'm Avi. I'm the CEO at NIL Foundation. NIL Foundation has built the first sharded rollup. We've kind of gone back and revisited the original Ethereum roadmap, taking a very opinionated approach around control and what things you give, what kind of customizations you give developers, what kind of things you don't. But we'll maybe get into that. One thing, well, it's funny. I was actually on a panel like a day or two ago in this room, and they asked me for a fun fact. So I don't know if anybody was there, but I have a Kazant. So I have a relative who is my cousin and my aunt. And there's no blood mixing, don't worry, and I'm not from the South.
Very nice. So now that the icebreakers are out of the way, hopefully that was a bit of fun. Today we're going to explore some of the challenges that Ethereum is facing from its leadership, but also things like scaling, interoperability, the competition in the landscape, and the evolving community. But first, let's talk a little bit about the challenges that Ethereum leadership is facing today. And I'll ask this to both of you, so let's start just, a little bit about the Ethereum leadership structure. How does Ethereum's leadership look both from a foundation perspective and also an ecosystem point of view?
Man, I'm on the wrong panel. I don't know. Is there a problem? I think to me Ethereum already when we joined 7 years ago was kind of like, okay, there's a bunch of people that have strong opinions, right? And they share those, and then people can get behind them, can debate them, right? Ethereum scaling for a long time was like a really key question that people had odd opinions on. But I personally, and I can give sort of a bit of a Celo backstory, but I never looked to like Ethereum Foundation or some other entity to do something, right? Ethereum is code and it's there, it's working, and you can do stuff with it, and people have done a lot of stuff with it, and everything for the most part is composable, and that's really fun. So I maybe a bit of a sort of non-popular opinion. I think Ethereum doesn't really have a problem right now. I'm happy to take that view for this panel. There are things that could be better that can be said about anything. And also, I think a lot of this is I think it really depends on the time horizon, right? That if you bought ETH a few weeks ago at 2,800 and you look at the price line like, Ethereum has massive problems, right? If you zoom out and you say, is Ethereum delivering on some of its mission? Has it figured out some of its bigger problems? Actually, it's kind of done a good job, and has done a good job in a way that we haven't historically seen any other sort of organism, for lack of better words, do, right? I mean, for the most part, we've seen companies, come and go, sometimes over very long time horizons. But we haven't, Ethereum is a special thing, I think, that can outlive, the longest lifespans that we've seen for companies because of its setup, and that is both a feature and a bug. So I don't know, like, good question, but I'm actually like, yeah, I would say, look, there's I don't have any expectations to Ethereum leadership. I don't even know who I would point at, right? I mean, there's some founders there that I think still play a pretty important role, but I certainly I'm not going to go on the street and have some demands of stuff that they should do.
That's fair. And just to add a little bit more context for you before you start there, obviously there are several layers of the sort of leadership in Ethereum. It's not just the foundation, but of course also the decentralized autonomous organizations, the community discussions. So what are your thoughts there, Avi?
Well, yeah, I'll address that point first, I guess. Yes, there are many organizations in and around Ethereum. I think it's one of the huge advantages that Ethereum has. It has a bunch of these organizations that are willing to pour resources into its development and future. But the reality is the EF is like, the higher council, right? They kind of make and decide what is and what will not be. I think what Ethereum has achieved is incredible, but I think it's difficult to say that there aren't problems at an organizational level or at a leadership level. I think the EF was designed with the right mission in mind, which is to remain as credibly neutral as possible and ensure sort of the longevity of Ethereum and its ecosystem. I think the best way to do that is to set up guardrails such that free markets sort of evolve the ecosystem and the technology in the direction that they hope it goes towards. And I think the main issue and challenge that the Ethereum ecosystem and the EF is grappling with today is that they put in the wrong guardrails. And the free markets have really gone beyond and out of their control. And what I'm talking about is sort of the layer 2 or roll-up centric roadmap. They really optimized for scaling execution through L2s or through rollups with no plan for interop. So we have a bunch of isolated systems that don't speak to each other and run different EVMs, and allowed a lot of them to extract most of the value, creating corporate incentives that do not align with one another and solving this interop problem retroactively. They also kind of put their hands up with scaling the L1 for many years because, well, rollups were going to figure it out. And what we're finding is actually for the rollups to exist and persist to exist, especially on ETH, you need the L1 to be valuable because you look at L2 beat and the TVL tracking of ETH flows from L1 to L2, and it's tapering off. And that's a big problem. Liquidity and users need to be on the L1 for the L2s to be incentivized to stay there. So I think, long story short, there are some issues with the guardrails that the Ethereum Foundation put in place. And in order to solve them, they need to kind of break their pact with credible neutrality and be a bit more opinionated. They need to scale the L1. They need to really force as best as they possibly can some interop standards. And that will eat into L2 market share, and it will be opinionated.
Very nice. So our next topic here will actually be interoperability. So obviously interoperability is crucial for Ethereum's growth, but it's also a significant challenge. So how do you see interoperability playing out in the Ethereum ecosystem, and what challenges does it still face in this area? We'll start with you, Rene.
Sure, maybe sort of continuing on the previous question a little bit. I do see Ethereum as the ultimate settlement layer. And I think there's strong product market fit for that vision already. Now, I think it's like a time horizon question, right? If you look at value capture, and I think you made some good points, the question is that a temporary phenomenon, right? Because Ethereum is changing its kind of setup, and there have been obviously big changes, even with like the merge and everything, right? Or are we in sort of a longer term equilibrium? And I don't think we are right now, right? So I think it's a little bit, to me, it's kind of like, okay, well, it's too early to basically make a call on like the sort of Ethereum value capture in a world where you have a lot of thousands, if not more, L2s, and even sort of sub kind of groups of L2s having sort of different value capture from the L1. However, I think there is kind of you could zoom out and you could say, hey, over the long run, assuming everybody agrees on Ethereum being that settlement layer, and assuming there will be thousands of chains, then I think Ethereum is going to be okay from a value capture perspective. Now, interop is interesting, right? Because again, it's somewhat related, right? In the short term, you will have maybe different local maxima, right, than what ends up being sort of the future kind of more stable state. And that is going to be largely driven by use cases, right? I think we've seen this already with interop in the last 3-4 years where, I remember conversations where people were like, hey, forget about chains, forget about layer ones. All the value capture is going to happen at the bridges, right? And then a few bridges got hacked, and then suddenly bridges were not cool. Now bridges are cool again because interop is a big topic, right? And sometimes it's like healthy to zoom out and say, well, what's going to be like, what's going to be sort of the equilibrium state here, right? And I think there's strong value capture around particular use cases, right? If you are the best bridge due to some technical setup or some liquidity kind of management, right, between two chains around maybe even just one asset, and that is like a highly frequented route, right? Think about it a little bit like towns connected by highways and streets, and somewhere there's a toll lane, right? That could be a really good business, but it's not necessarily the solution that's going to solve everything, right? So to me, it's kind of like, I think for the foreseeable future, we'll have sort of point solutions that for certain use cases will provide the best solution and will kind of capture value in the same way that L2s today capture value as kind of temporary point solutions. But I wouldn't extrapolate that as a statement around value capture, both from a settlement layer perspective and from an interop perspective.
Very nice. And Avi, just to put you back on track there, how do you see interoperability playing out in the Ethereum ecosystem, and what challenges do you see it facing there still?
So the largest issue with interop is just the coordination overhead, right? That 10, 100x more difficult to solve than just the engineering problem of having a messaging format, some sort of protocol to ensure reliable message passing, and some sort of settlement. These are things that actually they all exist. It's just we haven't agreed upon what is the right configuration of each of those components. And again, I kind of come back to my previous comment. There aren't natural market forces to incentivize people to agree on those things, right? And it's not just actually between what you might call roll-up clusters like our OP stack and Arbitrum, or ZK Sync uses Elastic Chain. It's actually within some of these ecosystems. The app chain model is that businesses, institutions like Coinbase or Kraken, they come in and they run a roll-up. Now, Kraken and Coinbase, they're very fierce competitors on the centralized exchange end of things, and somehow there's this belief that just because they're running a roll-up, they're going to work well together. I think this is kind of a silly idea. And so this is coming back to, well, how do you solve the interop problem? I think one option is that the EF becomes more opinionated, right, and kind of in a soft power way enforces a standard. The other is that one of these clusters who figures out interop will kind of become the dominant solution and export that solution to others. Now, I think in implementing interop, you need control. It's really a question of control. You give up control as a roll-up to be part of a system that will always be able to communicate with one another in perpetuity. That's where we've made kind of a very hard opinion that okay, you actually give up your control from the start. You're never going to run a shard. You're never going to run a roll-up. We're going to treat everything as a homogeneous, single, unified execution environment. And that's great because you get the network effects that come with it, but you're not going to customize the virtual machine, and you're not going to run a sequencer and earn sequencer fees. So yeah, I think the industry has to really grapple with this issue of control and the trade-offs that it gives. Yeah.
Excellent. And just to follow up a bit there, in brief, how close do you think we are to sort of the ideal interoperability? Maybe you can even use baseball terms.
Yes, I think we're probably like third inning, and that may seem counterintuitive because I said that we have all these components built, but long-term interop is it's not an issue of moving assets cross-chain. It is an issue of distributing logic, application logic, across many servers at once, and this is something that we are very far away from. Right now we really live in this paradigm that there are these single state machines and applications live within this single server. And that the only thing that is going to move between them are assets. Well, if you look at every single computing paradigm or programming paradigm or application paradigm, you see that you start in a single server model and you move to a distributed setting later on. And this is strictly a function of scale. You hit these memory requirements that you're not able to get out of a single machine. And we can throw as much RAM as we want, but eventually, if these are global systems, you're going to be bound by that. So I think we're really far away from the end state of where we want to be.
All right, and that's a great segue into our next question about scaling. So this is the other sort of persistent challenge that Ethereum is facing. What are some of the current hurdles Ethereum is facing in scaling, and how are they being addressed both on the Ethereum on Ethereum itself and within the broader ecosystem? We'll start with you this time, Avi.
Questions about scaling.
Yeah, what are the hurdles that Ethereum is currently facing? How is it being addressed both in Ethereum and in the broader ecosystem?
Got it. Well, there's two, there's in any data system, there's two ways that you scale. You scale vertically or horizontally, right? And a lot of, I think, how that is manifested in our industry is really, it comes down to philosophical and cultural differences. Ethereum very early on had the foresight and genius to optimize for horizontal scale. That was where the original sharding vision came from, then where plasma channels emerge, and then the roll-up centric roadmap. And I think the foresight was one that you need the ability to add new hardware to the system of interest to scale, get this sort of linear scaling law. And two, it's also just a much better framework for decentralization and censorship resistant, because you're no longer relying on the ability to shove as much compute and memory into a single server, which is the sort of vertical scaling framework. And you can do this over many servers at once. And so sort of from ethos perspective, it's very aligned.
Very nice. Let me give Rene an opportunity here, because we have about 5 minutes left.
Yeah, so maybe I give a bit of a unique perspective here. So with Celo started as actually a fork of Ethereum, so layer one, first proof of stake EVM even, for those who remember. And we kind of the core team made the pragmatic choice to put forward a proposal about a year ago to move Celo to become an L2. And I think that's really, in some ways, an endorsement, right, of the work that kind of Ethereum has done around the scaling roadmap, but also for us a recognition that, I think there's a lot of pieces of the stack to tackle, and, sure, we can have part of the team continue to tackle thinking about consensus and other things, but, there's sort of bigger challenges that as sort of a technology stack. Ethereum is a technology stack, right, if you include sort of go all the way up to the application level that you have. And it's been interesting because, along the way, of course, we've scaled block space. And, I think for those who remember, like the inscription kind of hype last fall, right? We had, like, I think in a single day, there were like over 20 million transactions, and the chain just handled it fine, right? Which, I think 3-4 years ago, we would have had serious doubts about that happening. And so, and then even now, right, I think, of course, right now, big focus on L2s, but then L3s, right, for even like kind of creating extra opportunity for applications that need extra block space, right? And I think it ultimately comes down to, okay, what sort of functionality sits at what level, right? If you're a big corporate that wants to just have a loyalty program that's fairly close, right, and people interacting with it, it's in the product and like moving tokens around, yeah, do that on an L3. Why like pay L2 gas fees even, right? And if you, however, then want a user to kind of bridge out, right, maybe there's really good infrastructure kind of connectivity to off-ramps, on-ramps, exchanges on a specific L2, right? That L2 could be the chain that you're sort of, the L3 to, or it could be part of sort of a collective that's connected through sort of some native interop, right? And so a lot of these things that from the L1 perspective back in the day, from a Celo perspective, right, we would be like, oh shit, we got to figure this out end to end. We need to solve all the things. In the future, already now, other people are solving these pieces, right? And people that are composing with Celo now kind of can do so in very different ways. And I think that's a little bit the magic of sort of Ethereum 2 here and sort of the way Ethereum has kind of gone about scaling. And yeah, not everything is figured out, but I think pretty optimistic in terms of like, yeah, this can scale 10, 100 times bigger and we won't run into some of the challenges that everybody was so worried about 5 years ago.
I have a question for you. Could you, like, how much more difficult is it to run an L1 versus a rollup? Operation.
I think it's become more easy to do the L1, but the cost of the cost of L1 is just tremendously higher, and not just the pure cost of like the validators, but the core infra you need to just have like the stuff that your developers want. So I think that's probably the biggest advantage, and you can pass on those cost savings, right, through lower fees as well. So that's, yeah, I think any new L1 today, I would, especially if it's just an EVM fork, I would have serious questions. Why are you doing that? If it's something that is like a different experiment, right, outside EVM, yeah, you can put it in the bucket of like, okay, interesting experiment for the future. Who knows what's going to happen, right? And those should still exist, but yeah, pretty bearish on alt EVM L1s.
Yeah, those are some really amazing insights. Can you just maybe give everyone a way that they can find out a bit more information about NIL and Celo?
Yeah, nil.foundation. That's our website. Follow us on Twitter. Follow me on Twitter. Like my stuff.
What's your Twitter? Is it on here? Oh. You should plug your Twitter.
It's just my name, Avi Zurlo. Yeah, and we're live on testnet, so if you're a developer, deploy some contracts. Yeah.
Celo.org is the website, Celo on X, Twitter. And then check out self.xyz, Self Protocol on Twitter.
And also, too, just got to go ahead and plug Lisk.com. All right. Well, that's the end of our panel here, and thank you for your attention as well as your participation, and best of luck to everyone in the space. I know you're all gonna make this a really great and innovative time for us, and so thank you again. Let's get a round of applause for our speakers.